Congress. Thrilled to be with you tonight and with my co-hosts, Medea Benjamin, co-founder of CODEPINK, Hania Jodat, who's also involved with Roots Action and many other campaigns. And we have our co-sponsors, Massachusetts Peace Action, Cole Harrison, who will be joining us shortly. He is the director, and Brian Garvey, who's an amazing organizer and writer who will be sharing with us tonight a great article that he wrote on the Roger Waters concert. Tonight, we're going from Iran to Afghanistan, and let's make peace. Let's return the money so the Afghan people don't starve. We have fantastic guests. We have Trita Parsi, who's the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, and Masuda Sultan, who's an Afghan women's rights activist who previously worked in the finance department of the Afghan government. So it should be a fantastic conversation. We'll have a Q&A. We have a couple of actions to say return all the money to Afghanistan and lift those sanctions on Iran. So please stay with us throughout the program so you can engage in those actions and amplify them as well. Before, we do that, however, we're going to have a few updates, and we can start with Ukraine. All right, so a lot of you may know and may be already participating in the Peace in Ukraine Coalition that was initiated by CODEPINK and involves a number of other organizations, including Veterans for Peace, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, MAPA, Massachusetts Peace Action, and so forth. We had a tremendous week of action last week, and we're going to share some pictures. Basically, our messaging was this: ceasefire now, stop all of this death and destruction. We want negotiation, not escalation. We'll just hold off 1 second there. But maybe you can go up a little bit, honey. Negotiation, not escalation. And please, no more weapons to fuel this war. Few of us may realize, but the United States is on a trajectory to spend $40 billion in weapons alone for Ukraine. And here we see, I know these people, Medea Benjamin and Jody Evans and Wright and some other CODEPINK activists who are in front of the Capitol. This was last Monday, and there's Olivia. She's also an organizer with CODEPINK. They're inside the Capitol, she and Jody, and they were going door to door to members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus to say, come on, speak up. We want you to advocate for diplomacy and to vote against these weapons. All right, let's take a look at what was going on in Madison, Wisconsin. There we go. We also had street vigils. So the idea was, we had 4 days of action to reach out to members of Congress, to the White House, the State Department, to the media, and to host street vigils and deliver letters to our districts, to our congressional districts. So let's continue. We see Rachel Brunke there in San Pedro. She was at Congresswoman Nanette Berrigan's office. And then we had Massachusetts Peace Action did a lot of organizing in Massachusetts. These were areas near Boston, Malden, and then Newton. San Francisco, a shout out to Cynthia Papermaster and others in CODEPINK in San Francisco. Let's stay there for a second. Thank you, Hania. You'll see that they were lining up in front of a Senate office. They marched through the financial district from Senator Padilla's office to Senator Feinstein's office, saying, negotiate, do not escalate, no more weapons. And they flyered on the street. We have a peaceinukraine.org website where we have flyers and all sorts of resources if you want to do something similar in your congressional district. And here we see activists in Philadelphia, Peace, Justice, and Sustainability Now. They're meeting with staffers for the senators, the U.S. senators from Philadelphia, to say, support a ceasefire. And then Rockville, Maryland, Veterans for Peace has been very active there. Jim Driscoll has organized protests in which veterans and others have gotten arrested, and they've gotten some media coverage. Their slogan is, stop the war, save the climate. Over in Milwaukee, we see a picture from Marquette University, where they flyered as well, passed out hundreds of flyers with QR codes where people could contact their Congress member right away. And then Santa Cruz, they made the local paper as well. And I think there might be one more. Let's see. Oh, a couple more. This is Santa Barbara. I'm in Santa Barbara, Chumash land, and we stood on the steps of our Congress member, Salud Carbajal. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee, and gave our letter saying no more weapons to the staffer. We were there at the same time as a member of a local Ukrainian church who was asking for the weapons. So there was a very dynamic conversation underway there. And then Baltimore, and there you see the banner. So that was what we were up to last week. Again, please do join us. We'll have a call tomorrow, the Peace in Ukraine Coalition call, 1:30 Pacific time, 4:30 Eastern. And just in terms of updates on Ukraine, today, Russia applauded the fact that there's going to be a referendum in the East, in the Donbass region, to see if these areas in the East want to join the Russian Federation. Ukraine says this is a stunt to distract people from grave battlefield losses. I shouldn't say grave, but you know what I'm saying. And the US says, oh, this is a charade, but Putin is expected to make a speech about this referendum tomorrow morning. So we'll stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, the president of Mexico, Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, he said he has a peace plan and he wants the United Nations, the UN general, the head of the UN, and the Pope to mediate dialogue between Ukraine and Russia to end this war before it gets even worse. So those are some of the updates on Ukraine. Now we're going to go to Brian.
Thanks, Marcy. And just let me say, we were thrilled to be able to participate at 3 different locations during that week of action. At the Assistant Speaker of the House's office in Malden, Massachusetts, at Stephen Lynch's office down in Quincy, and at Jake Auchincloss's office out in Newton. And they all went very, very well. It was great to be out there on the streets advocating. I just wanted to give a quick update on what's going on up here in Massachusetts about Cuba, which was the subject that we were covering the last time we were all together for the CODEPINK Congress. So just since then, we've been organizing, and it looks like later this week, one of our biggest cities around here, if you're from the Massachusetts area, people may know Somerville. It's kind of like Boston's Brooklyn. And it looks like by the end of the week, the Somerville City Council will be passing a resolution calling for an end to the embargo. So it looks like, municipalities all across the US are going to have to drag us out of this horrible, regressive policy, the blockade on Cuba. But I'm hoping to share some very happy news by the end of the week, and that is a resolution that can be replicated. So if there are activists in your city or town that care about ending the blockade on Cuba, think about getting together. Think about making it publicly official that your city or town opposes publicly this 60-year blockade on our neighbor just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And also, we have a new Cuba subcommittee here. We have vowed that every month we're going to be standing out, both in Western Massachusetts and here in the Boston area, demanding an end to the blockade and really engaging the public. And I hope to do my own report back on October the 9th. So stay tuned for that. We're putting it into practice, exactly what we were talking about last time, an end to the blockade in Cuba.
Thank you so much, Brian. And please do put your email in the chat. So if people want a copy of that resolution that you're seeking to pass at the municipal level, they can contact you. Great. And now we're going to go to Cole Harrison for an update on something that we all need to be very vigilant about stopping, and that is the Taiwan Policy Act. And you see a picture here, and Hania will share more of it in a minute as Cole talks about this, of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, because they made a very a terrible decision. Let's just put it that way last week. Tell us about it, Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Marcy. So we've been hearing that the tension between US and China has been escalating for several years. Taiwan is the flashpoint. We heard a lot when Nancy Pelosi was there in the summer. And what's really going on here is that the entire US elite, both parties, are united on the strengthening the US hand against China economically, militarily, on multi-levels. But there is a tactical difference, or I guess there's a difference among the US elite about how to handle this. Do you come out and say it? Do you directly challenge China's claim that Taiwan is part of China? Or do you just send arms to Taiwan and maybe slap some sanctions on China, but without being so politically confrontational? So Pelosi's visit represented the politically confrontational view. In a way, the administration is more cautious, although you can never know with this administration. But they've been slipping the money, the arms to Taiwan without a lot of publicity and without a lot of political confrontation. So enter the Taiwan Policy Act. Senator Menendez of New Jersey, chair of Senate Foreign Relations, has written this act. It's the most radical change in US policy towards Taiwan since the 1970s. It increases the likelihood of US-China armed conflict. It provides $4.5 billion in military assistance, $2 billion further in loan guarantees, explicit sanctions to defend Taiwan if there were any military action. And it almost says that we're going to treat Taiwan diplomatically almost as an independent nation. So, but there is a disagreement about this. Senator Markey, who also went to Taiwan, but had a more relatively more dovish position than Pelosi, and 4 other senators voted in committee against the Taiwan Policy Act. That's Markey, Murphy, Paul, Schatz, and Van Hollen. China is very upset about this act. That the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement says that if this bill is signed into law, it would greatly shake the political foundation of China-US relations and cause extremely serious consequences to peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. So, you know, we know that the US policies towards Taiwan ever since 1979 is based on a policy of strategic ambiguity, where the United States would not declare that it would necessarily come to the military defense of Taiwan in the event of war, but it also won't say that it won't. So Biden has been walking back this policy of ambiguity. He's been saying maybe we would defend Taiwan. So everyone's getting tense on all sides, but this Taiwan Policy Act is a typical act of like US braggadocio, you know, rhetoric and political posturing, trying to inflame the situation. So long story short, we need to oppose this act. They have, you know, there is a battle going on in Washington over this. It's not a given that it will pass. It's not a given that Biden will sign it if it does pass, but it might, and he might. And so it's important to stop this act from becoming law and try to move US-China relations towards a more diplomatic and less confrontational direction.
Thank you, Cole, for that excellent update. Yes, if you're not part of the CODEPINK Congress Google group, please do join us. Let Maha know you'd like to join, maha@codepink.org. We put out an action alert last night about this Taiwan Policy Act, saying, please get on the phone, send an email to both of your US senators and tell them you not only want them to vote against it, but you want them to mobilize others to vote against it and to come out publicly against it. They really need to hear from us. It's very dangerous. It's insane. You know, it's a desperate attempt to maintain unipolarity for the US to be the boss. So with that, let's go now to Medea Benjamin, who has an exciting announcement for us.
Well, I'll be quick because I want to hear our speakers. So I have a new book on Ukraine coming out October 1st. I will put, it's in the chat right now. You can actually pre-order it now, starting on a speaking tour on October 1st, thanks to our friends at Massachusetts Peace Action, starting in Western Mass and Boston, going to the Midwest, and then I'll be traveling all over the country, basically. If you're interested in hosting something, or please get in touch with Maha. Maha, maybe you could put your email in the chat or put the link to the page. And one other thing I wanted to say is that I've been listening as much as I can to all the talks at the UN General Assembly and pulling out the interesting pieces that have to do with Ukraine and Russia. And we'll be posting them on the Peace in Ukraine as well as the CODEPINK site. But it's very interesting to hear what many of the world leaders are saying. And, as you can imagine, most of them are saying Russian invasion terrible. We need negotiations. We need to end this war. Thank you.
Thank you, Medea. And I just want to put in my own personal plug. I read an advanced copy of Medea and Nicholas J.S. Davies' book. They're co-authors of War in Ukraine, Making Sense of a Senseless War, and it is fantastic. I read it, I think, in 2 sittings. It's gripping. So please, if you can, support Medea, support Peace in Ukraine by getting involved with her book tour and bringing her to your city or your town. All right, I know it's early or late, depending on what your sleeping hours are for Masuda. So why don't we go with her first? Medea, you want to do the introduction?
Yes, I'm glad we're going to Masuda first because I think it is about 4:20 in the morning right now where you are. When we invited you, we thought you'd be in New York. We would have never made you get up at this hour, but we're delighted to have you, and you look so beautiful as always. Masuda is an Afghan-American women's rights activist. In 2008, she was advisor to the Afghan Ministry of Finance. I've known her for over 20 years and know that she was intimately involved around the US invasion of Afghanistan because many of her family members were killed during that time. And she wrote a very gripping memoir that was published in 2006 called My War at Home. And most recently, Masuda and I have been collaborating probably about 10 times a day, working on this Unfreeze Afghanistan. And she's been absolutely brilliant and such a delight to work with. So thank you so much for getting up. I don't know if you even went to sleep, but in the middle of the night to be with us.
Thank you, Medea, from the bottom of my heart for all the times that you have walked with the Afghan people in all of these difficult years over the last 20 plus years. I know you've been working on these issues for longer than 20 years. And to CODEPINK, to Marcy, to Jody, and to all the brothers and sisters that are supporting this work and that are on this call. It really means a lot. It makes a difference. I could, I don't want to embarrass Medea, but she held my hand through one of the hardest times of my life, trying to make sense of what was going on in Afghanistan. And she organized the first group of Americans, 9/11 family members, to go to Afghanistan to witness what was happening in January of 2002. And, you don't really understand the impact of the work you're doing unless you're on the ground in some of these places and suffering what seems to, often be a very, a situation you don't know how to get through. You don't know how to tell the world that what they're doing is wrong, to tell the powers that be, in this case, the United States. And, the proof of Medea's work and CODEPINK's work and the work that you all do is in the fact that this 20-year war was lost in large part because of our policies, really because of our policies in Afghanistan. The bombings and the civilian casualties, the raids on people's homes, the 85,000 bombs that were dropped, and the way that we handle this, and a lack of peace negotiations. One would think logically that if you were at war with a group for even for a little bit, that you would attempt to talk to them, that would be a part of your, let's say you were not a pacifist, you were just, you were just logical and practical. You would engage in negotiations with your enemy because you would assumingly not want to not to be attacking them or attacking villages or going into these provinces, which is not good for Americans either. We don't want to send young Americans into these places to what is obviously almost 3,000 people have died, 20,000 people have been injured in Afghanistan, and countless others have psychological and other difficulties and issues and traumas and guilt, moral injury. And you just wonder if a lot of that, if not all of it, could have been avoided. And for me, part of the learning was that there is power in people. There is power in what you are doing, because what happened with what Medea and the 9/11 families work is that they got Congress to pass a law to assist civilian victims of U.S. Casualties caused by the U.S. And of course, it wasn't a perfect system, and it didn't get to everyone, but it actually changed the situation for a lot of people, and it was unprecedented at the time. And I'll continue on this story because one of the reasons that the Taliban gained support in a lot of these rural villages, particularly in these areas where the U.S. was very actively trying to rout them out, is that people started, revolting against the practices, both of the U.S. and also of the Afghan army, the abusive practices, and this is a bit of a controversial issue. But, people say, well, there was no support amongst the Afghans for the Taliban. You have to wonder, if there wasn't any support, how could they have taken the country in 11 days? How could they have, literally walked into Kabul without any resistance? That tells you that there was something very, very wrong with the formula that we were employing. And so the civilian casualties issue is credited as one of the main reasons why the Taliban ended up taking over in Afghanistan, because people were fed up with the war. And the channels for peace negotiations were not open. They were not open from the very beginning. We know the Taliban were not included in the peace negotiations in Bonn. And then all of those years that I was in Afghanistan, and I'm no pacifist, I'll be honest with you. It's not like it's not like it was black and white to me. And I didn't understand a lot of what was happening in terms of, it was democracy, it was, human rights, it was all of the good things that we wanted. But it came also through the power of the gun. And the lesson is that you can never force anyone to accept a system of government and accept a democracy with foreign troop presence with force. And in fact, that ultimately all unraveled so quickly, and people had to run for their lives, as we saw. The fact that war is hardly talked about, that the issues that led to that suffering are hardly acknowledged or understood, is another interesting phenomenon to me, that we have just sort of swept it under the rug and not really analyzed. Why weren't there engagements with the Taliban early on? Why even years into the war, we would hear of people coming into Kabul trying to meet with the Afghan authorities and refusing meetings. Then we would hear these stories of people posing as Taliban that turned out to be shopkeepers that came into Kabul to meet with the government. And it was actually even in the New York Times that this had happened. Some senior level person who was posing as Taliban came in, but turned out to be a shopkeeper. Now, I would ask, well, if the Taliban were the de facto government for 5 years before the U.S. went in 2001, how come no one knows where they are or who they are? How come no one knows who the ministers are? How come a shopkeeper can fool the leaders in Kabul? Clearly, there was something very, very wrong. We had shut that entire opportunity for engagement and discussion because we thought we were going to win and we were going to build this other society. And as you work on Ukraine and all of these other issues, I wanted to share that very personal experience and those observations to say that it's not assumed that people are talking to each other. It shouldn't be assumed that people have the best interest of the whole at heart, that people have individual interests and drive, and sometimes they're not really psychologically ready to do what is necessary or simple as talking. And with that, I don't want to take a lot of time. I'll jump to what the issue is right now, which is with the departure of the US and the donors, essentially 80% of Afghanistan's budget walked out the door overnight. And no one had really planned for this. No one had really planned for a lot of what had happened. But we were supportive of the end of the war. Medea and I were in touch. We wanted this to be over, as did the majority of Americans, as did the majority of Afghans. But the way that it happened, and I'm not just talking about the airport scenes, I'm talking about the departure of the support for the Afghan people when they had been built up in this way. The country was built on aid, to take everything away overnight. And then to have to, on top of that, seize the central bank reserves and the sanctions that were on the Taliban then get imposed on the entire country meant that everything went down really, really fast. People had worked for, all of these years, 15 years now of gains are being wiped out because of what is happening. For all of the years of debate at the end of the war about having to keep troops there for protecting the gains of the Afghan people, for protecting the gains of the Afghan women, that conversation is gone. No one is talking about, well, if we were so intent on keeping the troops there to protect the gains, why have we just walked out the door now? We don't talk about protecting the gains. We're about to lose 15 years of gains in 1 year. Nobody talks about that. So it's very, very important that we highlight the need for aid to Afghanistan because that country was, again, nurtured and built on aid for these 20 years. And these people don't have a way to supplement that right now. That can't be done overnight. So half of the UN's $4.4 billion appeal is funded even after all of this time. This is since January. We're approaching winter again. This winter, we expect is going to be worse than last winter. So last winter, we were afraid that it was going to be one of the worst famines in history. We avoided that because there was a step up in donor aid to the WFP by the US. But with the continued lack of funding, with the increase in food prices and fuel prices, and a lack of savings now, because now the Afghan people have had a year of not working and a year of just being on these crutches and barely getting by. We still have famine-like conditions, with 90% of the population not having enough to eat, 50% of the population surviving on 1 meal a day. Medea and I were together on an American Women's Peace and Education delegation this March and April, and we met people who were boiling leaks to survive. This was inside of Kabul, which is the capital, which is where the aid is supposedly flowing very well. People can't bank. You can't send money from New York, to the same people, before a year ago, you could send money freely for any humanitarian cause. Now, even though these exemptions are there based on Treasury qualifications, effectively, you still can't do it. Why can't you do it? Because of this whole sanctions regime that has come up that makes you suddenly flagged for terrorist activity if you're trying to support a girl in Afghanistan or support the same program feeding people in Afghanistan. It's absolutely the worst thing that could be happening right now is making it harder for people to send money to support people. You talk about remittances. You talk about transparency in the banking system. Well, the central bank itself told us, look, our funds have been seized. There are these sanctions. Everything is going underground. Now we're saying to people, go back to Hawala system, the old system you used to use, where people physically transported cash from one place to another because banking is so severely crippled. These are the real effects on people. And if you go to Afghanistan, people can love the Taliban, they can hate the Taliban, they can be indifferent to the Taliban. But the one thing they agree on is that these sanctions are harming them. Go from top to bottom to poor to middle class, what's left of it. And they will all tell you that this is a harmful thing in their life. Why doesn't the United States understand this? So as we think about Afghanistan, we ask for, number one, increased aid to Afghanistan because they are starving. We are responsible in great part for what happened in that country. We've been there for 20 years. For returning their assets, and the Afghan fund brings the assets into Switzerland, which in theory gets it one step closer to Afghanistan, but in practice really needs to be pushed that those assets do make it back into the central bank. Central bank is conducting currency auctions and doing monetary policy. In fact, they're doing one tomorrow. So let's not ride this fantasy that they're just going to take the money and run and use it for terrorist purposes. They're actually conducting monetary currency auctions regularly, and they're running a government for better or worse. I'm not saying it's a great government, but I'm saying that we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and hold everything back while everyone suffers. And then the third thing is these sanctions, these harmful sanctions. They are harming everyone in the country. They're bringing everyone to their knees, and I don't see how this helps any of our national interests or security interests or women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow. There's a lot to digest there, and we will be taking action tonight after our next speaker. You are listening to Masuda Sultan. She's an Afghan women's rights activist, co-founder of All in Peace, a coalition of organizations that were working very hard to end the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. All right.
Can we thank Masuda and let her go, given the time it is where you are?
Thank you. And before I go, I will say that we are still pushing for girls' education and women's rights. I didn't talk that much about it in this session because I think that a lot of that policies has to be pushed from the inside of Afghanistan. And we're talking here about U.S. policy. We have a few levers, but we should be supporting education. As Medea fundraised through CODEPINK, very thankful for the fundraising you did for girls' education. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Masuda.
Getting a lot of love in the chat, and yes, she has been on Democracy Now! Several times, as people were asking. Thank you so much, Masuda. That was fantastic talk, and get some sleep.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to go to our co-host Hania Jodat, who is going to update us on another exciting campaign, and then introduce our next speaker. Hania, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marcy. Thank you, CODEPINK family. Thank you, Masuda, for such powerful presentation of the current situation in Afghanistan. And we all hope to get engaged during and after this call. So another very exciting campaign that we're very much looking forward to is the Diffuse Nuclear War Coalition, which is launched by Roots Action, and its upcoming events in October in the United States are responding to the reality that the dangers of nuclear war have risen sharply this year. In fact, unfortunately, very few members of the House and Senate have risen to the occasion by speaking out or publicly urging measures to de-escalate tensions between nuclear powers and seriously revive negotiations for nuclear weapons treaties and disarmament measures. Our activities range from October 2nd all the way through the 16th, spanning the 60th anniversary of the start of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and represent an opportunity for concerned individuals and our audience members and groups to visibly convey their concerns, especially now given the circumstances with Ukraine and what's happening, the tensions rising in Taiwan. Diffuse Nuclear War has about 95 plus organizations that co-sponsor it, and we have 3 events coming up, and CODEPINK is one of the co-sponsors. We have a live stream October 2nd with a diverse number of speakers, along with a wide range of information and analysis. And the live stream will really emphasize the importance of activism while encouraging creative participation. I'll share the link in the chat for all of you to please sign up and join us that day. The event will be for 90 minutes. The October 14th picket line will present an opportunity for folks in every state and congressional district to visibly convey their concerns in front of congressional and Senate offices. And the 16th of October will be about making nuclear weapons a focus for communities and activists and elected officials from all policy angles. So we're going to have a number of activities that are being planned right now individually by organizations, and we very much look forward to it. Another really important thing I want to discuss before we go to our next speaker is some of the current events that are unfolding in Iran with regards to Mahsa Amini. Mood is very somber for those of you who are following the current news. Just recently, a very young 22-year-old Kurdish woman, again by the name of Mahsa Amini, was arrested by the morality police for wearing her hijab loosely. There are reports that she was beaten badly in jail. She ended up in a coma and passed away shortly after. Iranian women and men have taken to the streets to protest mandatory hijab laws, and some are showing their dismay and frustration by burning their headscarves and cutting their hair short. I stand in solidarity with my sisters in Iran, with men and women both who have been really crippled under sanctions and these mandatory draconian laws that are really crippling the middle class and poor. And we'll end with a quote from Dr. King, where he says, "Injustice anywhere is threat to justice everywhere." So whether it's an abortion clinic in Texas or a Roe v. Wade situation where a woman cannot choose, or it's in the streets of Tehran or Azerbaijan where a woman is mandated to wear the hijab, women should, in any parts of this world, have the right to choose for themselves what to do with their body, their hair. But without further ado, I will move over to our next speaker, who I'm very pleased to and delighted to introduce, Trita Parsi, who is the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and an expert on the US-Iranian relations, Iranian foreign policy, and the geopolitics of the Middle East. He is the author of Parsi Treacherous Alliance, The Secret Dealings of Iran, Israel, and the United States. And he was named by the Washingtonian Magazine as one of the 25 most influential voices in foreign policy in Washington, D.C. in both 2021 and 2022. Trita Jan, please take it away. خیلی خوشحالم که می‌بینمت عزیزم.
خیلی ممنونم. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for participating, to CODEPINK and Massachusetts Peace Action for all of the amazing work that you all are doing and hopefully will continue to do. Want to echo the sentiments just expressed about the situation in Iran, which is, too often we see these images coming from there. I was asked to talk about the JCPOA and what the situation there is, and bottom line is that we're in essentially a pause. The last amended proposal from the Iranians was one that both the Europeans and the United States characterized as a step backwards, and there was no confidence that anything could be done in the short term. So all sides seem to have preferred that if there can't be a quick deal, it's better to postpone this till after the midterm elections. And although I personally believe, that the United States definitely wanted to see a yes from the Iranians, I do believe the Iranians still want a deal. I would say, though, that I felt like there was a bit of a sigh of relief in certain quarters in Washington. Because if the deal had been passed now and it would have gone to Congress for a vote, it was very clear from some of the supporters of the bill, of the JCPOA in Congress, that they felt that this is a really bad time for them to vote on this right before the midterms. Moreover, I'm sure you all noticed that as it looked as if the US and Iran might come to an agreement. Israel's government was losing its mind, and there were a series of very high-level Israeli politicians coming to Washington to convince Biden not to go along with this deal. To a certain extent, that was driven by domestic Israeli politics because they have their elections on November 1st. And even the faction within the Israeli government that opposes the JCPOA but does not want to have a public fight with Biden about it, they too felt compelled to have to go and pressure Biden very publicly because otherwise they would have a liability in the elections, mindful of the positions and the rhetoric that Netanyahu is using. By postponing the whole thing, it seems to me that a silver lining for the administration, if one can put it that way, is that they may end up getting a deal after the elections, hopefully, in which the Israelis will not be as adamant in their opposition, or at least the volume. And perhaps more importantly, I'm sure the administration was not looking forward to doing something that potentially could help Netanyahu come back to power. Now, whether there will be a deal afterwards or not remains to be seen. One thing that is, in my view, giving me a degree of hope is that if truly this is the end of diplomacy, that is certainly not the signaling that is coming out of Tehran, out of the EU, or out of the US. There's disappointment, but nothing that says that this is the end of it, but instead it's a deep freeze, it's a pause. By definition, a pause comes to an end. So I do think that there will be some new momentum after the elections. There's no guarantee, of course, that there will be a deal. But I wanted to raise one issue that I think is perhaps equally important, which is that even if there is a deal, it's essential, in my view, that there is significant efforts made after the deal to use the remaining 2 years of Biden's first term, which may end up being his last term, to ensure the durability of the deal. Because of what has happened in the last couple of years, because of the fact that the United States has not been able to offer anything resembling guarantees that it will not once again, without cause, leave the agreement, we're in a situation in which neither side actually believes that the deal will last more than 2 years. And the question is then, what are they going to use the next 2 years to do? Will they use the next 2 years to try to take some measures to strengthen its longevity and give it as great of a chance as possible to survive the next election in the United States? Or will they use it to prepare themselves for the coming confrontation in 2025? The path of least political resistance is to do the latter, to essentially just prepare themselves for the next fight. That means that Iran will try to insulate its economy from future US sanctions. It means that the United States will try to work to make its military option more credible. I think it's essential that if we manage to get a deal, that there is a lot of pressure on all sides to take as many constructive steps as possible to build on the deal in order to make sure that it can survive the next year. There's no guarantees, but there are things that can be done. I laid out a couple of them in a foreign affairs piece that was published 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the combination of those can be sufficient to make sure that even the next Republican American president may be deterred from repeating what Trump did. The reason why I think this is so important is because it will be a miracle if the JCPOA is revived after what Trump did. But the idea that the JCPOA could survive 2 American exits is essentially an impossibility. So this is our last chance to not only get the deal, but to make sure that the deal lasts. And one of the mistakes that was made after the JCPOA in 2015 is that everyone was just so exhausted after the deal finally was clinched that there wasn't much investment in it afterwards and efforts to make sure that it would be as strong as possible, that it would be able to withstand all kinds of future political crises, etc. And then, of course, we saw what happened. We have to use the next 2 years to do everything we can to make sure that this deal and future deals, whether it's on Iran and nuclear stuff, that we don't end up becoming a country that can only sign a deal and hold to it one political cycle. But we have no ability to make commitments that go beyond that, at least no credible commitments. And I hope that CODEPINK will put some of its focus on these efforts later on as well. I'll stop there, but more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. And I see there are questions in the chat, and we will get to them in a minute. So stick around. First, we're going to go to Brian Garvey of Massachusetts Peace Action. Brian's going to lead us in an action.
Thanks, Marcy, and thanks, Dr. Parsi, for that great presentation. And I'm looking forward to all of the questions from you. So I won't keep you very long, but right now, what I want to ask you to do is to take some action based on what you've just heard. So CODEPINK has created a great advocacy page asking Congress and the administration to do everything they can to return to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, as quickly as possible. You just heard all of the reasons why it's absolutely crucial that we do this right now. So we're going to put the link in the chat. I can put it in myself, or someone else can pop it in there for you. It's incredibly easy to take this action, and it's incredibly important because we know that politicians are making these decisions, and politicians care about public opinion, whether or not they admit it or not. So we need them to hear from you. We need them to hear from your friends. We need them to hear from, your family members, your entire network. So please, not only should you take this action, but you should share it with everyone that you know and get them to care, right? Because of the things that Dr. Parsi just said. This is absolutely crucial that we get back in the Iran nuclear deal. This is a deal that was working, that united countries across the world. I mean, the United States, Iran, Great Britain, France, Germany, China, Russia. I mean, how often do those countries come together and agree on something? This is why it's absolutely crucial that we return to this deal. And also because what Trump did getting out of this deal, it absolutely hurts American credibility. Not just on Iran, not just on the Middle East, but on every foreign affair. Is the United States going to keep its word? We could do a lot to repair that if we got back into the JCPOA. So please, if you haven't taken the action yet, just click codepink.org/no Iran sanctions. It's incredibly easy, and we need to flood the inboxes of these politicians in Washington, D.C. They need to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Trita has limited time left, so we're going to go back to him for a few questions. Trita, can you stick around for a couple minutes?
I can stick around about 5 minutes. I thought I was going to go first. I have to pick up my son.
All right, let's go. Somebody posted in the chat, why should Iran rejoin the deal? Aren't they better off joining with Russia and China and creating an alternative currency and saying goodbye?
No. I mean, if we on the one hand say that these sanctions are hurting the Iranian people, then I don't think it makes sense to also say that Iran will be better off without the deal. The sanctions need to be lifted for Iran's civil society to be able to grow and for Iranians to be able to live up to their full potential. One can have significant, and I have critiques of some of the things that I wish was in the deal, but that's different than saying that they're better off without it. I think the main critique that is valid against the deal is obviously this will not be a particularly beneficial deal if the United States can willy-nilly go in and out of the deal. Keep in mind, mechanisms were put in place to make sure that Iran could not leave the deal without immediately getting punished. That's what the snapback sanctions at the UN Security Council are there for. No such mechanisms currently exist for a potential American exit. If the US exits the deal again, just like it did under Trump, everyone else gets punished, but not the United States. And so those are some things that I believe need to be fixed, but they can be fixed once everyone is back into the deal rather than thinking that they need to be fixed before there is a deal, because that means that's a completely new renegotiation. I don't think politically that unfortunately is possible.
Thank you. Hania?
Yes, Trita, the next question is, has there been any improvement on the Saudi-Iran relations and just in general relations between the Arab world and Iran?
This has not been reported, but there actually has been some significant progress in behind the scenes diplomacy between several of the states in the Persian Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran. There's no love fest or anything like that, but what is clear is that all of these states want to make sure that there can be that they can avoid war, and even though they have a lot of problems with each other, they want to deal with those problems within a framework that does not lead to that type of an escalation. And this is to a certain extent driven by the fact that these countries are not convinced that the United States is more or less leaving the region, or even if it has a presence, it's not going to fight in the region. And once they don't have the protection of the United States, then suddenly diplomacy becomes much more more attractive. What is fascinating is that it's gotten to the point that, yes, if there is a JCPOA, those negotiations will probably speed up even further. But even without the JCPOA, it seems like the region has decided that they're going to make sure that they insulate themselves from any future potential conflict and try to help prevent it. And keep in mind also, two GCC states, Qatar and Oman, have played a crucial role behind the scene, trying to help make sure that the JCPOA is renewed.
Thank you so much, Trita. I know that you have to go. It's been a great pleasure to host you on CODEPINK Congress. Trita Parsi,
Thank you so much for having me.
Of the Quincy Institute. All right.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Trita.
Trita.
Thank you, Medea. Talk to you soon.
We'll unmute and thank Trita. Thank you, Trita.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Always.
Thanks to all of our speakers. My goodness.
Yes,
Thanks to all of them.
Tonight. We're going to go back to Brian, who has another action for us.
Thanks, Marcy. And let's just highlight. I think we got a bit of an echo going.
Brian's here.
All right.
That doesn't work, Brian. Go back to the way you were.
Let's try that again. How about? I'm
good
not
now.
hearing myself twice. Hearing me once is enough. But yes, we let Masuda Sultan go because it was, I believe, about 4:35 in the morning at the time. But we don't want to we don't want to leave off without everyone taking action on Afghanistan. We need to ask our government to change policy. God, just for the fact that we absolutely destroyed that country for 20 years, to add more injury to injury by keeping those assets and by insulting them and saying instead we're going to take $3.5 billion and we're going to give it to the Swiss to dole out. We're not going to trust the people in Afghanistan with their own money. You know, we need to make some noise around this. So Maha just put it right in the chat. It's incredibly easy as well. You can just put your address in there and it will send messages not only to your members of Congress, but also to Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, and also to Tony Blinken, who runs the State Department, letting them know that you oppose the current policy. And letting them know that it's not only an immoral policy, it's just a bad one too. You know, it's only likely to make Afghanistan worse off. And that's not just bad for the Afghan people, that's bad for the entire region, and ultimately it's bad for the United States as well. So just like I was saying when we were asking people to take action on Iran, and if you haven't done that yet, please click on that link. It's very easy too. You know, these are politicians. They do pay attention to public opinion. They do, you know, hold their finger up and see which way the winds are blowing. And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to make some weather.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Brian. You are a great cheerleader for action. And we took 2 actions tonight. Thank you all for doing that. We're going to wrap up with some announcements. The hour is almost up. For me, I just want to invite you again to join us tomorrow. We'll have a meeting for the Peace in Ukraine Coalition. That's at 1:30 Pacific time, 4:30 Eastern. And if you need the link for that, you can just write to me at CODEPINK, and I'll put that right here in the chat. Also, if you want to join our Google group and get our action alerts, let me know. We are asking you to call your US senators to vote no and to publicly oppose the Taiwan Policy Act, which would funnel $6 billion in military aid to Taiwan to prepare for war with China. We don't want this. I also called Chuck Schumer today, his office, Chuck, a friend, right? I called his office and asked them to relay to him that I would appreciate it if this never came up for a vote on the floor of the Senate, and if instead the bill went to a landfill. Okay. Other announcements? Medea, Brian?
Well, I have one, Marcy.
Oh, Cole, you're there.
Which is our next CODEPINK Congress event will be in 2 weeks, and that is Medea's book talk on her War in Ukraine book. And as she mentioned at the top of the hour, that book will come out roughly October 1st. So she'll be doing a webinar with us on October 4th. So tune in again in 2 weeks for War in Ukraine.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Cole. Brian, was there anything else you want to add, or Hania?
Yeah, I just always say that we need to advocate to end the U.S. role in the war in Yemen, especially at this time. There has been a ceasefire, but that is going to be up at the beginning of October. So we need that ceasefire extended. So please, if you can, reach out to your reps. If they're not already on the Yemen War Powers Resolution, get them on that resolution, because that has a great deal to do with the fact that the ceasefire in Yemen is going on right now. We need to continue it.
Thank you. Hania?
I'm looking for John. I do want to end this call on a lighter note with a song from him, but I can't find him. So John, if you are here, we would love for you to unmute yourself and play your piano for us. But if you're not, then I guess we can just say goodbye.
Well, also, I do want to thank Shay Labau and Maha Khan, who have been doing the tech for us on this call. We are so appreciative that you make it all happen. So with that, we're going to close out our Zoom and wish you well. Join us, CODEPINK Congress, the first and third Tuesdays of the month. Tell a friend. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Great
Good night.
speakers.
Bye.